In a recent conversation I was having, we were talking about science and why science and the scientific method ultimately seems like such a reasonable, kind of the optimal approach to trying to figure out how to live, I guess, your best life. And the kind of quick premise of it was that, me and the person I was speaking with are of the belief that we're never going to know for sure, right? There is an objective truth out there in the world, but our ability as humans, at least now and for the foreseeable future, to actually find it and know that we found it and have confidence in it is non-existent, right? It's not real. So science is beautiful because what science does is it says, okay, we'll never know for sure, but we are going to very kind of analytically, logically test and experiment and learn and try and kind of fill in the dots, if you will, connect the dots, fill in the missing pieces as best we can, with a supreme understanding that we don't have all the information. It doesn't guarantee us anything. It doesn't mean it's 100% true, but it's the best, again, seemingly most pragmatic, optimal way to try and get a clearer picture of what's going on. And you'll be wrong plenty, and you'll kind of bounce back and forth, trial and error, and you'll test it out. And we kind of went through that approach. And that makes sense, right? In a lot of ways, that does seem very logically to be the best way to approach it. As we spoke about that, though, we talked about objectivity, right? That phrase, that term I've already mentioned once. And in many ways, that's the goal. We're trying to find like anchors that we can say like, okay, objectively, this is true. And if I know that, at least I know something more. And again, science doesn't really do that. It doesn't really give us objective answers. Debatably, right? Some people might say it does, but it's getting us closer to that. So we started thinking about what do we know for sure? What are things we can say are objectively true? And this can be a 5-hour video or a 5-month-long video discussing this, but the point we came to was, I think, right, hypothesis, that one of the things that is objective for us is this feeling, this sensation of, I'll call it good, but that's a very loaded term, so I'll explain it a little bit, but goodness, pleasure, this positive sensation, right? When we do something or experience something that feels good for us. Now, that phrase or that concept in and of itself, kind of this goodness, pleasure that I speak of, that's a fuzzy thing, right? And I'm not claiming to say that's a very concrete thing, but at the same time, we know what it feels like. Objectively, we know what that sensation is. Now, that's not to say that anytime something feels good, that means it is good in the other sense of it, right? In the more moralistic sense or whatever it might be. All I'm saying is in the search for those anchors, for those objective anchors that we can at least learn something from, that seems to be one, if not the most important one that we as humans have. We know when something feels good. We know when something feels bad, arguably, right? But that sense of goodness, that sensation of pleasure, is something that, from an objective perspective, is relevant and valuable. And you might say, well, why is it relevant and valuable? Well, the hypothesis is that anything we do in life has to end with that sensation. That has to be the end result of it. Now, it might be many, many steps till we get to that feeling, right? This isn't to say everything we do in life should feel good all the time. There's plenty of things we do that bring us discomfort or pain or suffering, but it's towards a greater good. The point is, at the end of that thread, at the end of it all, it has to result in that positive kind of sensation of goodness that I'm speaking of. Otherwise, it would make no sense for us to do it. So whether we're sacrificing our lives to make our kids' lives better, but that gives us that sensation of goodness, whether we're going out for a 6-mile run, which feels terrible, but once we're done and we like the way we look and we're in good health and all that, that gives us that sensation of goodness. Whatever it is, that sensation of goodness is what we're after. That's the objective, or at least as close as we can get to an objective anchor that guides us. And for me personally, the way I'm using that in my everyday life is, again, it's not the be all end all. even if it is an objective thing that we can grasp, it's not the be all end all. Everything else we always talk about still has to come along with it. You have to question, you have to challenge. You can't trust things at the surface. You have to acknowledge our blind spots. You have to be humble. You have to be empathetic. You have to do all those things. But if you do all those things and you pair it with this guide, this anchor, this objective anchor, this sensation of goodness, sorry, that's a shitty phrase, but I'm going to keep going with it. To me, that starts to get towards the blueprint of living your best life. Or as I would phrase it, as I've said at other times, is being thoughtfully authentic. Being thoughtfully authentic, to me, is the closest we get to a guarantee of happiness or a good life. It's the most optimal way to get to it. What does that mean, though? What does that look like? I've talked about it, but I think this gives a bit of the path towards it. You have to do the work. You have to know that you're never going to know for sure that you're on the right path, that you're thinking of something correctly, that you're being truly authentic to who you are. We're never going to know that for sure. But you do the work. You do the hard work. You do all the things we talk about in these videos. And if with that work comes this sensation of goodness, that's a pretty good sign. That's a pretty good sign. Now, if you only have the sensation of goodness and you haven't done the work, well, then it's, who knows, right? Maybe you're shooting up heroin and it feels good in the moment, but you don't know. If you don't have the sensation of goodness and you just do all the work, well, then you might be counterproductive to what you're trying to achieve in life, right? I think the objective of life has to be to maximize the net amount of that goodness, that sensation of goodness that you get, right? Net. There's going to be discomfort. There's going to be pain. So if you dismiss that and you just do all the work and you're constantly questioning and challenging, well, then to what end, right? It's not, to me, that's not the optimal way to live your life. But when you bring that into the equation, as fuzzy and ambiguous as it is, right? And it needs to be refined more, and I need to think about it more as others do and will and have. But that has to be part of the equation. Everything we do in life has to result in that. If it's not, right? If that's not there, something's off. Something's missing. There's more work to be done. If it is there, great. But make sure you pressure test the shit out of that. Because it's very easy for our minds to say, oh, that feels good. I like that. That must be good. Run with it, right? So it's that healthy tension you have to balance across those two things. But to me, that helps make it a little bit more real for me as I think about it.